Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report. Lakeland, Florida, Monday, December 22nd, 2025, 11 o'clock p.m. Crystal and Jason Kinney had been married for 2 years. He was a stepfather to Crystal's 13-year-old daughter and 12-year-old son. The two of them also had a third child together, a baby, at the end of 2024. Jason Kinney was watching a football game between the San Francisco 49ers, his favorite team, and the Indianapolis Colts. In addition to being an avid NFL fan, Jason was also an avid drinker, too. He had been drinking very heavily that night. Jason and Crystal's relationship had been anything but smooth, and tonight it was going to go all the way bad. During the game, the two of them began to have yet another serious argument. It got so bad, though, that this time Crystal told her son to go and call 911. The boy fled the house to go next door and call from a neighbor's home, and as he was leaving, he heard a gunshot. Police had arrived within 5 minutes of the 911 call, but it was already too late. Crystal was dead with a gunshot to the head, and her 13-year-old daughter had also been shot twice, once in the shoulder, the second time in the face with the bullet exiting out the top of her head. The child would be rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Jason didn't harm the baby, presumably because it was his biological child. Jason had fled the house just before the police had arrived. He then called his sister in New York, telling her that he had done something terrible, that it was the last time they would ever speak, and that he wasn't going to go to prison for the rest of his life. He went to his father's house in nearby Lake Wales to hide. Deputies were tracking him. They surrounded the property and closed in on a utility shed that was there. A single gunshot was heard from the shed. Jason Kinney would be found inside with a gunshot to the head. According to the Polk County Sheriff's Office, Jason Kinney has no criminal history. Well, that doesn't mean he wasn't committing any crimes, though, because his wife left a note pleading with him to stop doing cocaine again. So he had been doing it previously. She also told him that he was slipping into drugs and alcohol. During the course of the subsequent investigation, friends and neighbors told the authorities that Jason Kinney had been abusive toward Crystal, but that she had never called the police, so there were no domestic violence reports. This heinous act took place just a couple of days before Christmas, in Ron DeSantis' Florida, no less. The place is supposed to be safest in the world, after all. Ron DeSantis and his cronies made sure that there would be as many guns on the street as possible, and that certain people would have as easy access as they wanted to them as possible, because this would make Floridians safer. How's that working out? And this Sheriff Grady character, you can tell this clown just loves to see himself in front of the cameras. He adores every opportunity that he can get to try to act like he's some sort of big shot. You had this mother of three who was shot and killed in her own home, and her teenage daughter who almost died that night as well. The surviving family members are grieving, and what does Sheriff Grady decide to do? He thinks now is the time for him to get in front of the cameras so he can virtue signal by giving all the gory details, because he wants to show just how much he cares about this crime that he didn't do anything to prevent. There's always a number of domestic violence incidents that happen around the holidays. This one in particular made it into the white media news cycle, mainly because of the nature of this attack. But nobody in the white media or the political class asked the kind of questions about this incident that they would all be chattering about if the assailant happened to be, say, black. This was a mass shooting that took place. 3 people were shot, 2 of them killed, and yet that's not the way the white media is reporting on this, not calling it a mass shooting. I guess they needed to see more victims get shot first, or they needed to see a black gunman. So as usual, it's not about saving lives, it's about saving face. Oh, and before any of the people from the white right ask, if you look at Chicago during that entire 3-day weekend that this killing occurred, you find that 3 people were shot and killed during the entire 3-day weekend in the city of Chicago. Millions of people in what Fox News tells us is the most dangerous city in America, and yet you had one guy in Florida who was responsible for shooting 3 people and killing at least 2 of them. By the way, only one of the shooting victims in Chicago that weekend was black. Just thought I'd throw that in there because we know that's always what the white right really cares about whenever they mention the death toll in Chicago. But predictably, there was more Christmas carnage that took place last week, although the white media decided after the story in Florida they weren't going to report on the others. For example, you had a killing that took place in Pennsylvania, naturally, and the details of this bloodshed was eerily similar to the heinous act in Florida. This other incident took place in New Freeport, Pennsylvania, on Friday, December 26th at 1:58 p.m. Officers responded to the report of a shooting involving 2 victims. When they arrived at the home, they found a female suffering a gunshot wound, along with an adult male who was also wounded. The police determined the 2 victims were husband and wife, but that neither one of them was the shooter. They were both taken to the hospital, but the woman died. Investigators determined the shooter was their son, 18-year-old Jared Knoll. Police initiated a search for Jared involving the use of helicopters and search dogs. They told the public he was to be considered armed and dangerous. At 6:00 p.m. the next day, authorities announced that he had been caught in West Virginia and taken into custody by the West Virginia State Police without incident. Well, of course they took this fugitive killer in alive because he wasn't black. Knoll has since been charged with homicide and attempted homicide, and at last report is awaiting extradition to Pennsylvania. You know, James Carville, the Cajun Skeletor, said that Pennsylvania is Philadelphia in the east, Pittsburgh in the west, and Alabama in between. And boy, does this story prove it. And have the authorities been able to find any sort of motive for this heinous act? What was Scooter Jr.'s reason for murdering his own mother and trying to kill his own father? Hell, with these creeps, it could be anything. Maybe he didn't get the right color bike for Christmas, not enough mayonnaise on Christmas dinner, ain't no telling. But whatever the reason for this killing was, apparently it wasn't sufficient enough for the white media to give this story the coverage that it deserves. I guess they just found the optics to be problematic. And this whitewashing of the headlines became even more difficult given events from this week. On Tuesday of this week, you had a quadruple homicide that took place in a Seattle suburb. On Tuesday, December 30th, 80-year-old Danielle Culliver and her son, Mackenzie Williams, were found dead at her home in Mercer Island, which is described as a swanky Seattle suburb. Danielle also had a second son, Dominic Culliver, who lived with his wife in Issaquah. The Mercer Island police informed the Issaquah police that they had found the dead bodies of Danielle and her son Mackenzie and asked them to perform a welfare check for Danielle's other son. The Issaquah police found Dominic and his wife both dead at their home, too. Police haven't named a shooter, but it's being investigated as a mass murder-suicide, and from the reports, apparently Mackenzie Williams is the person they think did it. And what would be the motive? Well, it's a little bit difficult to say, but here's what was going on. Dominic Culliver, who was Danielle's youngest son, had been diagnosed with Angelman syndrome, which is a rare genetic disorder that causes severe developmental delays and requires extensive round-the-clock care. In fact, Dominic had lived with his parents until his father died in 2018. But in a court declaration, Mackenzie Williams accused Danielle of abusing Dominic physically and emotionally. She denied this. Mackenzie tried to get power of attorney so he could be solely responsible for his younger brother's care. Danielle would accuse Mackenzie of unduly influencing his younger brother. Danielle would wind up being charged with fourth-degree assault after a confrontation with Mackenzie when she refused to let him enter her home. She later filed for a protective order against Williams on behalf of the younger brother. She claimed that Williams' behavior had been unpredictable and aggressive lately, and she pointed out that he had a startling number of firearms in his home. Mackenzie Williams admitted that he had 53 firearms, in fact, which he surrendered when the protective order was granted. Danielle would be named as Dominic's sole guardian and conservator. Dominic would live with Danielle, and Mackenzie would be permitted to visit only on Sundays and Mondays, plus one weekend a month. And they also agreed that Danielle and Mackenzie would only communicate with each other via text so as not to upset Dominic. After all, you gotta keep the peace. I guess we can see how well that turned out. So from Christmas until New Year's Eve, from Florida to Pennsylvania to Seattle, there was bloodshed all over America. Mass shootings, mass murders, and mostly parents being killed. This was a Christmas of carnage. But it gets memory hold because the white media is worried that people might notice a pattern forming, and that would ruin the white media's narrative. The holidays are a turbulent time for people for a variety of reasons, but the tension between family members is definitely something that needs to be mentioned. And were these a bunch of black people shooting at each other anywhere in America, that's what would be leading the headlines, because it would be the feel-good story of the day for the white media. That's why they would love to report on it. And of course, there would be all the commentary about what's wrong with these black people. That would be what all the white media slants about this would be, if these were black people doing this. But the white media is more concerned about keeping up appearances than they are with keeping people alive. And as long as they continue to keep up this selective myopia, the only things getting exchanged around Christmas will be presents and bullets. And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: David Williams, Wally Bilal, Jimmy Whitfield, Amir Miller, and Dean Ballantyne. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.